Hey, it's Robbie here with Muddy Beards 4x4. Today, I'm going to be working on my 2005 Chevrolet Silverado Project Half-Ton Tow Rig, and we're going to be cooling down the transmission. Alright, so in this video today, I'm going to be working on the factory 4L60 transmission. With the goal to really lower the transmission temperatures, especially under heavy load and while towing. Heat is obviously the enemy of a transmission, and in order to prolong the life and make this thing more reliable, I'm going to want to try to do what I can to drop the transmission temps. So the first thing I'm going to do today is actually just a basic fluid exchange. You have to go down under there, drop the transmission pan to drain out all the fluid, and then you can put new fluid in there. And besides the obvious, maintenance purposes for while you do that, obviously new fluid also helps lubricate better and also helps dissipate the heat. But while I'm under there, I'm also going to be installing this aftermarket transmission pan. This is actually a Jegs brand pan, so it's very budget conscious, and it's a little extra capacity, so more fluid. It is all aluminum, and it's also got these ribs or these fins built in, which all help dissipate heat. So this upgrade should allow my transmission temperatures to hopefully drop a little bit. So let's go ahead and get started dropping the pan and exchanging the fluid. Alright, well the first thing that I want to do is I'm actually going to unbolt the transmission here at the cross member, and then I'm going to jack up the tail end of the transfer case. That makes it a lot easier to access the bolts for the pan. It makes it a lot easier to take the pan out when I get this thing jacked up. And so all this thing is just two 15mm bolts, and then I can jack up the transmission. Okay, so I'm under here and I've got a few of the bolts out. You can see that there's already tranny fluid draining out of here. It's a little hard for me to get light in here, so bear with me. But I actually like to try to undo the front bolts in the front of the pan first. And it seems like those ones up here, there's still one in there, but it seems to start to drain out a lot easier. Because these things don't have drain plugs, it really makes it a pain in the butt to not make a mess. Let's see here. The bolts right here that run across this transmission linkage that you can see right here are a little bit of a pain to get to. I had to put a pry bar here and kind of pry it out of the way. And you have to do the same thing when I actually go to pull this whole pan out. I'm going to try to get the rest of the bolts along the back here out. And then I'm going to try to slide this pan out without making too much of a mess. Quite a bit of it's drained already. You can see I got some of it all over the ground here, of course. But I'm going to try to get the rest of these bolts out and drop the pan, and I'll show you what I'm going to do next. Oh, shoot. Alright, well there's the pan, and it is dropped. So you can see the inner workings of the transmission here. That was definitely a pain. I jacked up the tail end of the transmission, and then this, let's see if I can show you here. The exhaust is kind of in the way, but this bracket right here, you have to, with it actually holds the, sorry I can't read, this bracket right here. This is actually it's like the bracket that holds the transmission linkage, and it tells you to just kind of pry it out of the way with a screwdriver or with a breaker or a pry bar, and you can. It's really hard I was afraid that I was going to break this plastic piece, so there's this little C-clip that holds it in that I managed to pop out so I could take this out. It made it so much easier to pry that out of the way once I did that. It took some finagling, but I finally got the pan out. So now what I need to do is get the new pan into place. Definitely replace the filter. I got filters down there. Definitely replace the filter if you do the big pan, the upgraded pan, the Jegs pan, because it is a deeper pan. You definitely want to get the deep pan filter. So when you go to the parts store, ask for the deep pan filter. So I'm going to pop the new filter into place. It goes in here, and then I'm going to get the new pan in and the new gasket and get it put on. Alright you guys, well, I got the new pan on here, and I missed quite a chunk of the filming, mostly because I was really frustrated. So I missed some of it, so I apologize for that. But you know, the pan goes on there, pretty self-explanatory. The biggest thing though is, let's see if I can get some good footage of this, is this exhaust pipe. So even with jacking the tail end of the transmission up like I did, you definitely need the clearance of unbolting the exhaust at the header flange. And you know, I went back and looked it up later, and you know, most people call for that whenever they do this. I was able to get the old pan out without dropping the exhaust, and it was a little bit of a bugger, but I was able to do that. But in order to get this on, there was no way, because it is a little bit of a deeper pan. There was no way I could get it in without dropping the exhaust. So not a huge project to get in there, those exhaust bolts. The problem is that they were so rusted and so seized on there that I just could not get them off. And I spent a long time, and it was super frustrating trying to get them off. The passenger side one actually came off a lot easier, but this side did not want to come off. In fact, Kelly had to come over to my rescue. He's got some better tools and better expertise. And one of them was so stripped out and so rusted that we ended up having to use one of those nut extraction tools, one of these deals with like the teeth in it to get to the nut. And man, after soaking it all night with PB Blaster and all that stuff, I finally got it out. So in fact, I still got to go replace one of the nuts. One of the nuts is still missing, so I need to go replace it. But I got this bolted back up. I feel like once I got the exhaust out, this was so much easier to get in and out, especially if you jack the back of the tranny up. It gives you plenty of room. And once I finally did get the exhaust dropped, I know some of you are going to say like, well duh, you know, but once I finally got it dropped, it made life a lot easier. But just getting those bolts out, man, that was a pain. And it was something that was very frustrating that didn't need to be. But now that it's in there, the only complaint I have with it is I did have some clearance issues with this pan with the filter. The transmission filter, of course I replaced it. You do need to make sure you get the deep filter when you do this, because it is a deep pan, but it was slightly rubbing on it. And I had to kind of like grind off a little bit of the little, like, there's like these little pads from the filter that touches the bottom of the transmission pan, and this thing was just kind of hanging up on them, so I had to grind them down a little bit, but I got it to fit. And then that thing right there, that drain plug, that is huge. Next time I do this, I'll be able to drain the fluid out and not make quite a mess, because I got transmission fluid everywhere. Anyway, after all that frustration, you guys, I think I'm going to call it a night, and I'm going to work on the rest of this project tomorrow. Okay guys, so now I'm on to the next phase of my project here to cool down the 4L60 transmission. So before I put fluid back in the transmission from exchanging the fluid and putting on the new pan underneath in the transmission, I'm also going to be upgrading the transmission cooler. Now this is also a Jegs brand transmission cooler. It's a 24,000 gross vehicle weight cooler, so it's not a lot bigger, but it is a stacked, I think they call it stacked fin style radiator, or stacked fin style cooler, so it's quite a bit more efficient. It's going to work a lot better than the factory one. It is a Jegs brand, but it does say Hayden stamped right on it. So again, pretty budget conscious, but I think it's going to work out fine. So let me show you what I got going on here. In order to take out the stock, transmission cooler, you need to take the grill out. So you have to pop some clips off here, and there's a plastic piece that comes out, and then the grill is basically held in 4 spots by these clips. And once you remove that, it's pretty easy. I just threw it right there. The stock transmission cooler is really only held in by a couple of those same plastic clips here, and then there's some 10mm bolts which I already removed, so this thing's ready to come out. The only tricky thing is the actual lines themselves. So there's supposedly a special tool for this, but you don't need it. They have these little funny looking C clips, which I think resemble part of a male anatomy, but anyway, I just used a pick. I was able to basically just get a pick inside here, and you can, you know, pry out this little C clip, and then all you got to do is just kind of push down or wiggle down these lines, and they do pop out pretty easy. So now that I got everything out, I can take this thing out. Of course, more transmission fluid, more mess, and I'm gonna need to try to figure out how I want to mount this cooler. So if you see it, it is, although it's not a ton bigger, it's significantly going to take up some more space. So I might need to get creative in how I'm going to mount this. Alright, so I've got the old radiator out, or the old cooler out, and this is what I'm doing to mount this. This piece, this kind of like cross brace here, was mounted like this. And so what I tried to do is, or what I'm doing is I actually just flipped it over. And I'm mounting it this way. That way I have this whole flat space right here to mount the new cooler to. I had to notch it, so I had to cut little notches out so that it would fit, but it literally fits the factory bolt holes. And the new radiator can fit flat up against this surface right here. In fact, you can see the holes that I drilled there where it lines up. Now as far as the top, I came up with this. I actually just cut off, here's my factory cooler, I just cut the tops off of this. And they have these little C-clips, or these little speed, what do they call these? Speed nuts that fit in the factory bolt locations. And so I cut those off at the right size. I think I had to cut off like 1.5 inches off the top, and I drilled a hole. And so now this thing's going to bolt to the factory location, and then this hole I just simply can run to these top holes that I drilled. There wasn't one that lined up on the new cooler, but now I'm going to use basically all the factory mounting locations, and this thing is going to sit up, you know, in place like this with all those new holes drilled and just some self-tappers. And the cool thing about that is that my lines that I have to run to this, I'm not going to have to run too much. They supply some rubber hose, which I really was kind of skeptical about, but I've seen so many people online and other people that do it. They just basically run rubber hose with hose clamps from the factory hard lines to the new inlet and outlet of the new cooler, and so I'm not even going to have to run very long pieces of rubber hose, which I think is ideal so I don't have leaks. So I'm going to get these pieces back on, I'm going to get the screws put in, and then I'm going to figure out the size of the hose that I need and get the hose attached, and this will be pretty close to be buttoning up. Kind of cool. So that's how it's going to sit. It actually fits in there pretty good. I mean, it looks like, honestly, I think it looks like it's supposed to be factory that way. So now I'm going to figure out my lines, going to figure out my length, see how they attach. This thing's coming together. Okay, well, I got the transmission lines. All I had to use was this little chunk of rubber hose, and I got those mounted on there with hose clamps. And really the last step is actually to replace all the fluid. I got my pan in, I got my my new transmission cooler put in, And I've already put in, actually, I've been running it for a little bit. I've already put in about 3 quarts. I'm actually not sure how much it's going to take to fill it up, because now I do have a little bit higher capacity pan and a little bit bigger transmission cooler, so I'm assuming it's going to take a little bit more fluid than normal. So I got to go drive this thing around, get it nice and hot, and then recheck for fluids and check for leaks. Alright you guys, well, after test driving it, I rechecked the fluid. I ended up having to add about another quart, actually a little over a quart, so altogether just a little over 4 quarts. I'm not really sure honestly what normal is. I think it depends on how much is drained out of the pan, so I don't know how much extra capacity I actually got, but everything seems to be working well. It seems to be shifting fine. I double checked, don't really see any leaks. So as of right now, I can only be happy. And so hopefully, after my adventure with unbolting the exhaust and getting the original pan out and everything, that this is going to be a worthwhile modification, and that I'll see my transmission temperatures drop. So if you like the video, give me a thumbs up. Please click subscribe, and we'll see you on the trail.